Lebidi, a young aspiring novelist, sits with his therapist, who is jotting down details about him in his notepad. The therapist presumes that Lebidi writes because it's a need for him. But Lebidi mentions an alternative approach. Writing is a fantasy for him, but he is honestly tired. He always thought that writing was an act of gratitude toward his parents, but now he has realized that's not true. Now, he writes for himself and uses it as an escape mechanism. It's his way of talking to himself, and he can do it forever. He even identifies where he went wrong. 6 months earlier, Lebidi was writing a novel while traveling to Lyon to meet his parents. He remembers being greeted by his parents warmly at their small but cozy cafe. He sits down with his mother, Fatma, who wants to know what his novel is about. She mentions his previous work, the Inspector Jack stories he wrote for children. But Lebidi sees no literary value in it as compared to the complex work he's doing now. Fatma introduces Lebidi to Philip. She tells Philip about how Lebidi lives in Paris before he takes his leave. His parents insist on giving him some money to make ends meet, which he accepts after little resistance. Soon after, he finds a quiet cafe to write in. But fate has other plans, as a young lady catches his attention. Her voice causes Lebidi to look up, but her appearance is enough to retain his attention. His eyes stay fixated on her as she makes her way outside the cafe, coffee in hand, and sits down at a table outside with her friend. She and her friend are both chatting nonchalantly while covering themselves with red blankets to protect themselves from the cold Lyon weather. Lebidi keeps observing her as she starts to smoke, after which, he also steps out of the cafe. The girl's friend is talking about her experience of staying in Tokyo when Lebidi approaches them. He awkwardly starts to talk, but the girl spares him the effort. She hands him a cigarette as she already knows that he wants one. The girls return to their conversation while Lebidi still stands there and takes the first puff of the cigarette. He immediately starts to cough, which cracks the girls up. He walks away to a corner to push the toxic smoke out of his lungs and spits on the curb. He turns around to see that the girl has walked up to him to hand him his phone that he forgot back there. Lebidi takes back his old broken phone from her hand and clarifies his intentions. He wanted to get her number and ask her out for coffee. She reminds him that she's already drinking coffee with her friend. So he grabs the cigarette from her lips, writes his number on it, and returns it to her. Lebidi is humbled down on a date afterward as he doesn't have the money to pay for his date. So all he does is pay for the soda with the remaining money he has left. His date has to pay for her salad herself and doesn't make a big deal out of it. Yet, Lebidi is aware of how embarrassing the whole situation is. It is later revealed that his date is the same girl from before. Her name is Alyssa and she's an actor. However, she is done dating fellow actors, contrary to Lebidi's assumption. She mentions that she finds artists to be self-centered, which leads Lebidi to reveal that he's also a writer. He technically doesn't consider himself an artist and underplays his aspirations. She grins when he explicitly informs her that she'll have to pay for her own salad. Lebidi later recalls the events of how his date ended, to his roommate, Alexei. He finds the story beautiful as it leads to Lebidi and Alyssa leaving together to head to her place. It reminds Alexei of when he met Sarah. For Lebidi, it's a fun memory of how Alyssa had to check if her father was still inside the house even though he was supposed to work that night. After making sure that the coast was clear, she invited him in and Lebidi seems to have fallen for her now. He stares at her profile picture on Facebook while he tries to sleep amidst Alexei teasing him. In the next scene, Lebidi braces himself for a meeting with his publisher, which he is quite nervous about. He makes his way upstairs to the office where his agent, Vincent, assures him that they're here for a good reason. The publisher, Isabel, leads them to her office after a friendly greeting. He finds the first 3 chapters of Lebidi's novel promising. His novel is much better than his short story. She commends his ability to immerse himself in the Algerian War with such precision and meticulousness, especially at his young age. She wants to release the novel in September as part of the new publishing season. So she needs a manuscript in 6 months, which is a bit overwhelming for Lebidi. Vincent jumps in at this point, emphasizing how hard Lebidi works to meet all his deadlines. Proceeding onwards, Isabel wants them to start with an option. This means that if they're not satisfied with Lebidi's work or if he fails to meet his deadlines, he'll be dismissed. On that note, Lebidi signs the book deal and gets a hug from a happy Vincent. That evening, Lebidi works his job as a delivery boy. He makes all his deliveries on a cycle and later goes through his financial situation. He is in debt and contemplates making more delivery runs when he sees something. Someone is stumbling drunkenly on the street, so he takes advantage by picking their wallet from the ground and leaving with it. Lebidi writes in a library next, where a man sitting beside him keeps chortling from time to time. His annoying giggles continue regardless of the librarian's shushes and Lebidi's death stare. Lebidi is further disturbed by Alexei's numerous texts, asking him to come home because he accidentally locked himself out. Lebidi leaves the library in sheer irritation, while the man beside him continues to titter. Alexei awkwardly apologizes when Lebidi returns to the apartment and unlocks the door for him. After having such a bad day, Lebidi finds himself sitting on the curb, smoking. He calls Alyssa but gets sent to voicemail. He leaves her a message, admitting that he wanted to hear her voice so he'll call her later. His next course of action is to briefly go through the book in his hand. Next, we see him attending a book launch party with Alexei. He feels left behind and inferior to everyone else there because they're all either with someone or successful. His peer especially adds salt to the wound as he confesses that Leibiddy's work deserves to be published before his book. Leibiddy acts humble and pretends to be happy for his friend even though he is dying from within. However, he finds some comfort in seeing his mom that night, who is always happy to host him. He later sits down with his old man and explains why he couldn't make it to the holiday gathering this year. It was mostly because he couldn't afford the train fares. His father, Jacques, inquires if he has a girlfriend, since he used to bring home knockouts all the time. Jacques makes Leibiddy laugh and gives him hope for a better life as he watches his parents sleeping together all curled up. Leibiddy later decides to pay Alyssa a visit at her apartment. Before knocking, he wants to make sure that he looks fine. So he opens the front camera of his phone and fixes his hair and teeth. Unfortunately, that is exactly when Alyssa swings the door open in his face, oblivious to the fact that he'd be standing at her doorstep. Naturally, she is shocked to see him there. Leibiddy smiles and starts to walk with her. He boasts coyly that he has also started to smoke and that it no longer makes him cough. He proposes the idea of them enjoying their time together whenever he visits Lyon. He doesn't come there often, and that is what bothers Alyssa. She is about to leave him to go to her class when he insists on meeting her later. He claims that he'll send her an address and she can come there after her class to meet him. After that, if she'd still want to be left alone, he'd happily comply. Leibiddy watches Alyssa, clearly apprehensive about the offer he has just made. Sometime later, Alyssa enters the coffee shop owned by Leibiddy's parents. She asks for a coffee and Fatma tells her to have a seat. Alyssa makes herself comfortable on one of the tables as Fatma serves her a cup of hot coffee. That's also when Leibiddy approaches them. He introduces Alyssa to his mom, who awkwardly gets up to give Fatma a hug. Leibiddy also brings Jacques over so that he can meet Alyssa. Leibiddy's parents sit down with Alyssa and Jacques makes a comment about how Alyssa doesn't wear the hijab. Alyssa lies that she usually has it on but didn't wear it today because she didn't want to offend them. Fatma understands the reason behind Leibiddy's recent visits to Lyon now. Some customers enter the shop and Leibiddy's parents get up to serve them. This is when Alyssa gets the chance to whisper to Leibiddy. She's upset about him blindsiding her, but the smile on her face shows that she liked the gesture. They kiss and make up. That night, Leibiddy finally gets some action as he makes out with Alyssa on a couch. They sleep together and he even brings her over to his own apartment in Paris. There, he gets some more action as he cozies up to Alyssa on a mattress. But they are soon interrupted by Alexei, who walks into the apartment unannounced. Leibiddy and Alyssa quickly hide under the covers while Alexei quickly realizes the situation and turns his back toward them. Alexei apologizes for interrupting them and quickly hops inside the shower. His motive behind this action is to help his roommate get laid and they can pretend that he's simply not there. Alyssa finds all this really funny and Leibiddy requests Alexei to come out of the shower. Alexei finally makes it out of the shower and meets Alyssa for the first time, even though he's heard of her often. Alexei playfully calls him a loser and apologizes again. He goes on about how he was with his Tinder date, but got kicked out by her after the first beer. Leibiddy and Alyssa crack up at his sob story and Alexei crouches down to give Alyssa a hug. He mentions that she makes Leibiddy happy, which makes him happy, and Alyssa blushes. Later that night, Alexei is fast asleep on the floor while Leibiddy and Alyssa lie next to each other on the mattress. They quietly text each other about how his loud snores resemble the sounds of a lawnmower. Leibiddy informs Alyssa that Alexei is still looking for an apartment and is crashing with him for now. He opens up to Alyssa by confessing that he wants to find a place to live with her. She quietly kisses him under the blue light of their phone screens and caresses his face. The next day, Leibiddy writes for a while at the library, after which he returns a call to someone. He recalls waking up this morning while Alyssa was still asleep. He wanted to make breakfast for her but found his mini fridge empty. He initially didn't make her anything because he had no groceries. He later stole a bag of pasta from a local supermarket and cooked her a meal with it. As he serves her warm pasta for their romantic dinner, Alyssa can't contain her joy. They dance to some music that night and Alexei joins in on the fun too. Leibiddy carries on with his delivery job until one day he runs into his old peer again. They used to be in college together and last met at the book launch party. One of them is a published author right now while the other is delivering food for a living. Leibiddy's peer sympathizes with him and he lies that he's doing this for his novel. Leibiddy fibs that he's doing this to get into character, but hardly fools his friend. Later that evening, Leibiddy throws away his delivery box and casually commits tax fraud. He even finds a lovely apartment and breaks the news to Alyssa. She seems surprised at first but wholeheartedly accepts his wish for them to live together. Leibiddy also discloses this to Alexei, who suspects that the apartment is too expensive. But Leibiddy is adamant that he can afford it, so Alexei supports him like all good friends do. After some time, Leibiddy travels to Lyon to have a talk with Alyssa face to face. He goes to her apartment while her father is away for some work. She wants to back off on their decision to move in together, even though she agreed to it back in Paris. Lybidi is confused and explains to her that they can't give up on a decision they made together at the first difficulty. He now suspects that Alyssa doesn't believe in relationships, which is maybe why she left. But he doesn't care and wants her to believe in him. He promises to keep her happy and never hurt her. But she points out that they never talked about it and he did all of this on his own. She was never asked about how she'd feel about moving into a different city, to live with a different person, after leaving her dad behind. The new apartment can't be her home because she was never involved in the process of getting it. Lybidi suggests that they can find another apartment, which leads Alyssa to admit that she can't afford the new apartment. She doesn't have any money to give him her half of the rent. She agreed to move in the first place because she thought they'd never find a place. Lybidi finds her adorable at this point. He advises her to just focus on school and move in with him without any worries. He offers to pay the full rent by himself and she can chip in after passing her exam. Alyssa doesn't want to burden him, but he happily agrees to support them until she gets on her feet. Lybidi helps carry all her stuff to their new apartment and everything goes well. Also, he watches videos on YouTube on how to quickly make money. He is in search of a concrete solution for their financial problem right now. He's considering getting into the stock exchange market but needs a loan. So he heads to Vincent's place to have a meeting with him. Vincent seems very busy with constant calls while his partner roams around half-naked in the apartment. Once he's done with his calls, Vincent finally sits down with Lybidi. He questions why Lybidi hasn't sent him anything in 2 months. Lybidi gets to the point as he asks if Vincent can give him an advance that he'll pay off once they sign. Vincent instantly deduces that Lybidi is in love and warns him of its consequences. He recommends that he write faster to earn faster. Lybidi is doing exactly that when he gets a call from Fatma. She denies calling because of a problem and insists that she called only to chat. Lybidi refuses to let Alyssa read his novel in progress because it won't be interesting to her. Alyssa points out that she'll read it anyway when it comes out. She points out having read his award-winning short story, which she found great. Lybidi gets more troubling emails from the bank, so he sells his camera and iPad online and reports it under theft to get more money. Then, he convinces his landlord to give him an extension on the due date for rent. His efforts impress Alyssa and earn him some kisses. Alexei also tries his luck with the whole cigarette borrowing technique that led Lybidi to meet Alyssa, but it doesn't really work out for him. Lybidi struggles to get money out of the ATM, after which he meets up with Alexei. He is apparently also following in Lybidi's footsteps and is signing a sales agreement soon. He is also going to get a beautiful apartment, and now all he needs is a gorgeous girl for himself. He desires a partner to share his passions with, and has also started smoking. He is in self-pity too, which leads Lybidi to the conclusion that Alexei still hasn't heard back from his ex. Alexei feels lonely since Lybidi left, but the latter grins, knowing his insurance fraud worked. Lybidi and Alyssa meet Alexei and his Hyacinth for a double date in a bar. Hyacinth is also an actor and a dancer too. Alyssa gets flustered when Lybidi gets up on the stage and dedicates a song to her. He even applauds her for getting a good grade on her mock exam and sings her praises himself. Alyssa looks and smiles at Lybidi fondly as he sings up on the stage. Meanwhile, Alexei takes Hyacinth by her hand and starts to dance with her. Soon after, Alyssa also joins the dancing crowd and takes Lybidi in her loving embrace. One morning, Alyssa wakes up to find Lybidi missing from their bed. He is busy doing some other work on the laptop when she reminds him that he has a novel to write. What he was doing in reality was to look at more ways to commit insurance fraud. He falls on the bed one day as Alyssa leans over him in concern. He explains that he tried under a truck to get insurance money, but failed. An ambulance was called and everyone thought that he was trying to so his body hurts now and Alyssa feels bad for him. She helps him take off his jacket and leaves him to rest in bed. She later makes a call. Lybidi wakes up to a notification on his phone and immediately calls his parents. He questions why they transferred him money. He learns that it happened due to Alyssa asking for help from them. Lybidi doesn't want his parents to bleed themselves dry for him because he's aware that they barely make ends meet themselves. He is not used to asking for money from his parents, even though they teach him that he can always come to them in times of need. Lybidi looks for another job and makes it to an interview. The lady, Susan, hires him because of how educated and cultured he seems. She explains the company's policies to him and commands him to be friendly with the customers. So Lybidi starts his job of selling branded glasses in a shop then and there. He panics as soon as the first customer arrives. So Lybidi runs off to Susan, who motivates him to deal with the customer in a friendly manner. Following Susan's instructions, Lybidi starts a conversation with the customer and discovers that he's a literary publisher. Things go smoothly from there and the customer makes the purchase. This earns Lybidi some commission on top of his minimum wage job. Susan trains Lybidi herself on how to make money off of every type of customer, and they hit it off. She even hands him a phone number that a customer left for him. Alyssa later drops by his workplace while Susan has already left. Alyssa tempts him to get intimate in the back room of the store as they're about to leave. But Lybidi doesn't get turned on because he's tired and finds this inappropriate. That night, Alyssa can sense that Lybidi is distancing himself from her. They argue the next morning because Alyssa found the number in his pocket. She doesn't trust him anymore and orders him to leave. He argues that he'd never cheat on her and is at work all day anyway. Nevertheless, Alyssa grabs him by the collar in fury. He is about to kick her out when he finally snaps. He exclaims that he does everything for her. Alyssa tries to leave him instead, but he grabs her and throws her on the bed. Lebidi reveals his darker side, which terrifies Alyssa, and she begins to sob. This is when Lebidi gets a handle on reality and walks out of the apartment quietly, out of shame for his actions. The ATM machine fails him again, so he resorts to stealing from the shop he works at. Lebidi stays bitter as he closes up at work one day and walks back home with Alyssa. He picks up a fight on the street with some men for no reason at all. It's obvious that the burden of supporting them is starting to weigh on Lebidi. His sex life with Alyssa is non-existent now, as he mostly and sleeps on the couch. It looks as if he resents Alyssa for the shortcomings in his life. This doesn't go unnoticed by her too, as she leaves to stay with her mom one day. She leaves a note behind for Lebidi, stating that they need some time apart. Dejected from everywhere, Lebidi ends up in his own apartment with Alexei. Alyssa texts him after a while, promising that she isn't mad at him but needs some time apart. He still tries calling her, but to no avail. A few days later, he consoles Fatma when he hears about Jack passing. He even attends his funeral without Alyssa by his side. Lebidi is now an avid smoker and tells Alexei about Jack's passing. Like the wonderful friend he is, Alexei gives him a tight hug and lets Lebidi cry his heart out. When Lebidi gets home that night, he writes away all his feelings. He writes about all the emotions he's facing and struggling with since Jack's passing. He wishes to love, like his father loved his mother. He sees himself for what he truly is, an imposter. The traces of the Tunisian immigrant son his mother tried to erase in him were to protect him, but they translated into him being a destitute living the life of an elite. He has become everything he used to hate. He is the rich's buffoon. He doesn't get any pleasure out of stealing or cheating but lacks the energy to G in life. In fairness, he isn't always dealt a fair hand either. Susan breaks the news to him that he won't be getting a bonus regardless of his stellar sales record. Him leaving the store suddenly and taking an unannounced leave due to his father's passing almost cost him his job. She makes it very clear that he'll have to prove himself all over again. Vincent gives him the laydown as well because he despises his novel. All he's done is written about his problems and Vincent doesn't want to send it. But Lebidi knows that Vincent isn't going to pass up on an option, and he won't budge either. Even though he calls it a piece of shit, Vincent has to own this novel. Lebidi finds Alyssa asleep in their bed when he comes home. They profess their love to each other and reconcile. Lebidi recruits Alexei to be his best man at their wedding. Surprisingly, his risk with the novel pays off and Isabel gives him positive feedback. In the end, Lebidi emerges a victorious man after all. Happily married to the love of his life, and a published author, just like his parents always anticipated.